let's go straight on to our next presenter, Dr. Martyn Shenton, Senior Consultant, Blue Frog Scientific. PFAS here to stay, Blue Frog Scientific, and Martyn, over to you.
Okay, thank you everyone. Lovely to see you all. Good morning. I'll start by really answering the question. It's a bit of a spoiler, but I do really think PFAS are here to stay, but there's going to have to be a change in the PFAS industry, how we use them, and what applications they're used for. Okay. So a little bit about me. I've been involved in PFAS really from my PhD when I started to polymerize fluorocarbons to make low surface energy coatings. And after that, I spent over 20 years at a UK fluoropolymer manufacturer in product safety and process safety roles. And now I'm at Blue Frog Scientific. I lead PFAS experts and also help on chemical regulatory compliance, particularly things like REACH for EU and UK. So PFAS it's really all about the chemistry of that CF bond. That CF bond is really, really strong. It's the strongest bond in organic chemistry. There's no equivalent in organic chemistry. And that's really what gives the PFAS their amazing properties, the durability, the water repellency, the non-stick, but also it's the cause of the persistence. That durability in the wrong place is just persistence in the environment. There's obviously such a diverse range of applications for PFAS, ranging from the smaller molecules to all the way up to the fluoropolymers. And these will be in transports, electronics, medical, biocides, all sorts. But really the important thing with PFAS is to make sure that if your application uses them, that the emissions are minimised in the process for both the manufacture, during the use phase, and at end of life. The PFAS definitions, there's quite a few, but really the common theme is the CF2 or the CF3 group. There are some subtleties between the UK, EU, and various US states. And again, a lot of the bad reputation for PFAS is linked to the C8 chemistry, the PFOA, the PFOS, and also some other smaller, mobile, functional PFAS. But PFAS is a lot more than that. There's lots of small molecules which might be used as solvents. There's monomers, and obviously then all the way up to fluoropolymers. And just an example of how different fluoropolymers are, perhaps from PFOA. I can remember talking to my local MP, and I had a chemical model of PFOA, and it was about this long, perhaps 2 foot long. I didn't have one of a PTFE molecule, because with a mass of 10 to 100 million, it would have been 4 to 40 miles long. So really such a difference in the sizes of some of these PFAS molecules. And generally PFAS don't get used because they are cheap. They get used because of the technical performance. And whilst I was working in the industry, a lot of the customers were always looking for alternatives and often started with alternative materials and built up to that PFAS, that fluoropolymer, for example, due to that technical performance. And just walking around here, there's a lot of industry with seals, gaskets, pipes, and there's a lot of reliance on particularly those fluoropolymer molecules represented in this hall. And again, despite that really negative image of PFAS, which we see in the newspapers, in the media, really PFAS has made a massive contribution to modern life, and I'm really proud of the 20 plus years I spent in the industry. So really PFAS probably came to a lot of people's attention in 2023 with the EU universal PFAS restriction proposal. And that was followed quite a lot of consultation or calls for evidence with industry. There was then a 6-month consultation for that with over 5,600 responses. But that's not really a surprise. They were looking at 10,000 substances. So 2 substances per response, perhaps not a lot. Obviously, in many cases, responses were focused on fluoropolymers, F-gases, and other industrial uses. And they say about 70% of those responses came from industry. So what's really going to happen with the EU? Well, they're taking a long time to go through the process. They're assessing the PFAS application by application through their risk assessment committees and their ChemUK committees. And that is continuing as we speak. I think the next session is in June. They've been looking at perhaps the easier to look at applications, the ones with less responses. So now we're heading towards perhaps the more interesting ones, the more important responses for industry. And because they're looking by application, it suggests to me that it's unlikely that there's going to be an exemption for fluoropolymers or an exemption for F gases. It's really going to be applications and potentially derogations within those. And obviously the F gases is another area which is caught under the EU PFAS universal restriction proposal. You might think that's double regulation. I know the regulators would argue, well, the Montreal Protocol has been really effective at reducing HCFCs, but it doesn't cover the emissions or the degradation products of the latest generation HFO F gases that can degrade in many cases to trifluoroacetic acid. So another very mobile and persistent chemical. Whether it's hazardous, that's perhaps a little bit more debatable. My understanding is it isn't. The EU already regulates PFOA and PFAS under POPs, as well as another chemical, and there's about 16 PFAS on the SVHC list. So actually PFAS are already regulated in the EU, in the UK, and globally. But what can we really expect from the universal restriction proposal? Well, originally it was a ban. No more PFAS at all. Although there were some time-limited derogations. My understanding now is now being much more considered that there could be other options considered, but these will be conditional on low emissions, monitoring, reporting, and will be probably very application specific as well. So we have to wait and see what happens with that. But we're still probably several years away from really knowing. But it's really important. Once those committees finish their assessments, they will publish their findings and there'll be a consultation period. It's only going to be 60 days and it could be at some point early next year. So if you're going to contribute to that, get ready now, because 60 days is not very long. And of course, in the EU, there's also a firefighting restriction, and they're also looking at some C6 chemistry as well. So what about the UK? Well, I think we had a bit of an update yesterday, and the UK is still very much at a let's gather the information phase. Yes, they're looking at, we have the POP regulations, which cover PFOA and PFAS. We have a potential firefighting regulation coming in some point soon. But for the rest of the regulations, which may or may not come on PFAS, it's very much data gathering. There's been a risk management option analysis and 8 substance evaluations relating to 2 UK producers, which were published in April 2023. There was a further substance included in that, which was a Chinese alternative to PFAS. The Environment Agency are doing a lot of data gathering and measuring. DEFRA have been running a stakeholder consultation forum for about the last 3 years. We're still waiting to see what output comes from that. So really the UK is using the opportunity, hopefully, to learn what's worked well globally, also what's not worked well, and gathering data from industry and downstream users. The EU also gets a bit more complicated with what's happening in member states. Some member states are doing their own regulations. So Denmark has already banned PFAS in waterproofing, in ski wax, textiles, and France is doing something similar. But France has brought in a PFAS tax on PFAS emissions of €100 per 100 grams. Other member states are considering. So again, we'll see what happens more broadly in Europe. But ultimately, we'd expect a consistent approach across all of Europe. So perhaps these member states' regulations are going to be perhaps the lower watermark of what happens. And really, just to focus on what I think is perhaps next for PFAS. This is perhaps the interesting part, and I think really we're heading to a reduced PFAS world. So definitely not a no PFAS world, but part of that reduced PFAS world, I think one of the most important bits is a reduction in emissions from PFAS manufacturers, users, and that end of life. And that end of life might be through incineration, I do not believe there's going to be biological PFAS degradation to break that CF bond, because you'll generate HF and then you're going to probably kill the organism anyhow. So incineration works well for mobile PFAS, and landfill is actually a good alternative for non-mobile PFAS. And partly that will be because we don't have the incineration capacity in the UK to incinerate everything. There's a lot of other demands for the high temperature hazardous waste incineration. Reduced PFAS availability. I think that's going to happen. We're already seeing a large global manufacturer of PFAS stepping away from the industry towards the end of this year. I was amazed that they had 22,000 products which contained PFAS. Some of those products will be replaced with alternatives by that company. Others will have alternatives from other suppliers, which are either PFAS or non-PFAS, but many will just fall away as obsolete products. And if you have a complex product, whether in the product or your supply chain, you really need to understand whether PFAS, fluoropolymers, F-gases, or whatever are involved in that process. Because those obsolescence risks you might not realise for many, many years. Again, partly due to the durability of these products. We'll also see, I think, a reduction in consumer applications. We're already seeing that from the member states in Europe. Cosmetics, ski racks, textiles are all areas which are well known to be reducing. I think an interesting one really is cookware. I've got some PFAS cookware, PWK cookware. It's great. It does a really good job. There are some good alternatives as well. Are they better? Are they worse? It's really up to you make a decision on that. So commercial cookware is something which is interesting, but industrial cookware I think definitely is going to still need the fluoropolymers and the PFAS included. And when you look at the alternatives, there's that risk of that reduction of technical performance. For some applications that won't be too critical, but for other applications it might impact durability, shelf life, warranties, or even safety. So really understanding the reason why you're using your PFAS, using your fluoropolymers, using your F-gases is key to understand your products. And also, it's not just for what perhaps you make. You have to think about your supply chain. If you're making a valve or a pipe, where do the other materials come from in your product? Are they reliant on PFAS as well? And I think there's a great opportunity, and we've seen it around here at the hall with some speaks, but also some stands on remediation, particularly for the smaller molecules, the reactive, the acids, the sulfonates. Reducing those in the environment through remediation from hotspots is obviously a really important and growing area. I think the CF bond, that carbon fluorine bond, is really, really special. And obviously one potential route is also a chemical route, and you have less fluorination. But again, what's going to happen with the PFAS definition? Is that going to expand, include a single CF? It's already mentioned in the California legislation that they will even look at a single CF substance. So that could even diversify the PFAS definition, which I think will be an even worse thing to do. But having a consistent definition is really important. So just to conclude, we're in a world of PFAS chemistry. It's complicated, it's contentious, but also really important for many applications. But we're at a stage where we understand the issues, and as a chemist myself, we can get solutions. We can move to a reduced PFAS world, but keep that PFAS, keep those fluoropolymers, the F-gases, the other chemicals for the applications where they really make a difference, where that durability or perhaps biocompatibility is critical to the performance of that chemical. If you're new to PFAS, please check out our website. We have an introduction to PFAS there. We have a stand, B140, just by stage 1. More than happy to talk to you about that. And I'm happy to take questions either now or later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martyn. Very popular presentation. And a PFAS reduced world is something I think everyone can agree on.